82 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance, and pursuant to Standing Order 81(4) and the motion adopted on Tuesday, March 7th, 2023, the committee's meeting to discuss main estimates 2023-2024 referred to the committee on Wednesday, February 15th, 2023. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses for the first hour. With us today, we have the Honourable Diane Laboutier, our Minister of National Revenue. Welcome, Minister. And I know with you, you have many officials from the Canada Revenue Agency. And just before we get started with your opening remarks, Minister, I just want to say thank you very much. And in my riding of Mississauga Cooksville, we do have a number of tax preparation clinics, you know, that are manned by volunteers, and with help from the ministry and the funding, that's gone a long way to helping many individuals be able to do their tax preparation. So thank you for that. And now the floor is yours.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, Chair. I would like also to thank you for giving me the opportunity of speaking to the committee today to speak to you about the main estimates for 2023-2024 and supplementary estimates C for the CRA for the years 2022 and 2023. I do have some key officials with me. I must say I owe a great deal to them. I can't say it too often. From the outset at the agency, we have two tracks. We administer federal programs as well as certain federal, provincial, territorial fiscal programs, and also many benefit programs. Since 2020, new services and new benefits have been added to help Canadians that had to face the pandemic of COVID-19 since 2019. And that led to our being able to ensure the security of Canadians during the pandemic, but also to protecting our economy. In our ridings, in our respective ridings, there were businesses that failed. Other businesses remained open, and there were lives that were saved because of the actions that were undertaken by our government. And I am very proud of the leadership that has been demonstrated by our government during that very difficult period. The federal government has constantly offered its services, and that is a priority for our government. We have extended the call center hours of operation. We've hired more people at the CRA in these centers, and for the peak periods, we've been able to answer more requests. And we also are able to establish queues on the telephone lines and give them clear instructions about how long it will take. Be very clear about this. The improvement in our services certainly remains a work in progress. We always have to strive to do better, and we will do better. And we work very hard at the agency to do so. With respect to our 2023-24 investments, we are asking for some $14.8 billion. That will allow us to fight against fiscal evasion and tax avoidance. we will be able to administer the federal program, the recovery program, and also the price of pollution program. In addition, under Sub-C, we will use funds to improve the call centers that help Canadians, to allow people to take advantage of the benefit to buy their first home, and to make the necessary changes with respect to the publication and administration of taxing of underused housing in Canada, very often owned by non-resident foreign owners. And there is, of course, the recovery of Canada. We have that benefit there to encourage employers to work towards better positioning their employees and also to better position the overall economy of Canada. Just to conclude, I would like to say that the administration strives to reduce the temptation that is there for multinationals to transfer their profits elsewhere out of this country. We want to be able to have that here for the benefit of Canadians. The present budgetary exercise, this actual one, is something that was undertaken under the terms of COVID-19. It was a colossal effort that we've had to put out. And I can tell you that the agency has improved due to facing that challenge. Our communications are improved, and our role as a key government agency that serves Canadians on a daily basis has also improved. But it's not always been easy. The CRA continues to strive for excellence and to fulfill the commitments that it has undertaken for 2022 and 2023. I want to recognize and salute the excellent work done by the CRA employees who were on the front line during that very difficult period. Even though there was a pandemic, they worked relentlessly to support Canadians, to provide the financial support that all Canadians needed at that time. They adapted to new conditions of work, including telework remotely, and they did so remarkably efficiently, professionally. They were our guardian angels. So in a word, their contribution made all the difference, and their very important work is still ongoing today. Thank you to all, and we are ready now to answer your questions. Thank you so much, Minister.
Thank you for the opening remarks, and thank you for agreeing to stay here the full hour. For the members, we started at 11:50, so we will go. The minister will be with us till 12:50. We're going to start with the first rounds. Each party will have up to 6 minutes to ask questions. Minister, and we're starting with the Conservatives and MP Chambers, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bonjour, Madame la Ministre.
Good morning, Madam Minister. I want to welcome you. We're so happy to see you.
Our next interaction. Last fall, there was some serious allegations with respect to advanced pricing arrangements. Can you update the committee? Maybe do you know any more than you did back in the fall about some allegations with respect to how advanced pricing arrangements have been given out? This was reported in the CBC and some other articles as a whistleblower case, saying that there's some challenges in how advanced pricing arrangements were being used in the department?
I lost the translation.
We can just check on the translation.
Est-ce qu'on peut vérifier si l'interprète...
So, MP Chambers, if you can repeat the question for the minister, thank you.
The 30 and
okay.
again.
Do you know any more has there been an investigation of follow-up on the complaints that were made by the employee? Are you aware of any kind of follow-up investigation?
Well, listen, I will let the people from the agency itself to answer that technicality.
I'm happy to take the question, Mr. Chair. So these are a series of allegations that were made a number of years ago. They were investigated a number of years ago, and the results did confirm that no serious wrongdoing was committed. It was in relation to a particular advanced pricing arrangement, and we were satisfied that all the necessary steps had been taken and that no inappropriate favorable tax treatment was given to a taxpayer.
Thank you. So from your perspective, there's no additional follow-up required on this matter?
The matter was fully investigated at the time, yes.
I think there was a commitment to some transparency with respect to that complaint. Has there been any kind of public disclosure of that investigation, or is that an internal? Are these documents kind of internal to CRA and they remain there? Does the Ombudsman look into it?
The matter and the allegations related to a particular taxpayer, and therefore the confidentiality provisions of the Income Tax Act do apply.
Thank you. On the confidentiality provisions of the Income Tax Act, Section 241, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has expressed some concern with respect to the timeliness of information that it receives from the CRA. Minister, are you aware of the concerns of the Parliamentary Budget Officer? And, do we need to make an amendment to Section 241 to make sure that a parliamentary officer has the information to do his or her job appropriately?
I'd like to say to my colleague that confidentiality of the data that is transmitted to us by taxpayers and by businesses is something that must be protected. There are rules that are very clear at the present time at the CRA surrounding Section 241, and we also have internal discussions to the effect that we ask ourselves, is there some way of improving confidentiality, but is there some way of making public statements? I admit that there is work that remains to be done, but it is a matter of confidentiality and the linkages between taxpayers and the agency. It is of prime importance for me and for the fiscal system, the tax system.
Would like to read you the quote just so you know where the Parliamentary Budget Officer is coming from. Every single time we have an interaction with the CRA, we get incomplete information. It has to be vetted before sending us aggregate tax information. So I think in some circumstances where they're asking for anonymized data, which would not identify a particular tax filer in the aggregate, where they're having some challenges and using Section 241. So I'll leave that with you to maybe contemplate as you're thinking about how to better collaborate with our Parliamentary Budget Officer. One of the items I was happy to see the recent news release about the underused housing tax. There was some leniency given to this year's filing. We have heard a lot of feedback from taxpayers about how difficult and potentially confusing it is. One of the things I would like to leave with you as a suggestion would be if you file the return 1 year, you should only need to file the return once for a property until that property is sufficiently disposed of or the control of that property changes. Requiring taxpayers to fill out a form every year seems significantly onerous, which I think will keep with the principle and the spirit of of the idea, but not unduly require a burden on taxpayers. And Mr. Chair, I believe I'm done.
We're at the
Thank you.
6 minutes, yes. Okay, so maybe in the next round. So we are moving over to the Liberals, and I've got MP McDonald, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister. It's great to see you here. We do have something in common, and those are the red shores of the Magdalenes and Prince Edward Island, so we're only separated by a ferry. Minister, I want to ask a question that follows up on something you mentioned in your opening remarks, specifically about lessons learned from the pandemic. Can you go into more detail about the lessons that CRA or its officials learned from the pandemic, particularly relating to customer service and communications?
Vraiment, je remercie.
Thank you. Thank you, my colleague, for your question. We have to bear in mind what happened at the beginning of the pandemic. The world more or less stopped turning, and that led to our having to put programs in place to help Canadians as private citizens, but also we had to help businesses and establish benefits that they needed. So the department reacted very quickly, the government reacted very quickly to put benefits in place. And as the pandemic wore on, and with respect to programs, we were able to refine the conditions that we were putting in place to allow people to access different programs. And so rules to protect, but also to be sure that it was the right person, the correct person that was receiving the benefit. And also, when we worked to put the benefit for the salary, emergency salary relief benefit, that allowed businesses also to make application to the CRA to have the necessary means in place. So what we were trying to do was establish winning conditions. And at the end, when we saw the progress of the pandemic and when the pandemic was waning, we saw the end of certain benefits, but we did do a postmortem to see what was effective just in case there were to be another pandemic. And we want to be better prepared to act to protect the population should that happen again.
Minister, this morning I met with women's shelters in Canada, some of our most vulnerable citizens and constituents. And, you know, there's the issue of at-risk and vulnerable populations is one that I hear a lot about in my riding. And I was just wondering if you could possibly go into some more detail of work you're doing in this area to help those people to make sure that they get their benefits and credits. I remember being a provincial politician in the Canada Child Benefit, going into schools and talking to administrators to ensure that they get the information to the appropriate people. So these people would apply for tax services and receive these benefits. And it wasn't, you know, selfish enough. I was the finance minister at the time, but it wasn't just for the individuals, but it was for the economies of each of our provinces, that it's extremely important, the millions of dollars that come into our provinces through these programs. So I'm wondering what your department is doing to ensure that we can access those individuals and provide them with the appropriate information.
Je dirais que cette question pour moi là est vraiment.
This is a really important question for me, because at the CRA, I wanted to be sure that people in difficulty receive the credits or the benefits from the programs that we were putting in place. So I traveled throughout Canada to see people and to the various offices of the CRA, but I also visited with those groups who work hard to help people obtain the benefits that they need and that they are entitled to. I said to these people who were volunteers, I asked, what can the government do better to help you? They said to me that over time, groups had received very little information, very small amounts of money, and that cost them money as volunteer workers to do the work that they wanted. But over 3 years, we set up a program of $11 billion to help these people do their work, to cover for traveling costs, to cover the cost of crayons, training costs. And when, say, for example, you make changes to tax rules, I noted that there were 13 million people in Canada, and there were more than 600,000 tax filings that really didn't that reflected people who really didn't know what they were entitled to. I went to Prince Edward Island just recently, and I saw that there was $15,000, $11,000. I had a member who said to me recently that in Ontario there was a woman with 6 kids who had never asked for the Canada Child Benefit, and she got $80,000 back. Because you go back in time for these benefits that have not been filed for. That helps vulnerable people. And also you have the municipalities. We need the ministers of finance in all the provinces and the mayors as well to promote the programs that we are putting in place at the CRA to help people who are in these difficulties and to cover their housing. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. MacDonald.
Stories to hear that people are getting the money that they deserve. And we're over to the block. And MP Sainte-Marie, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Madam Minister, for being here. We very much appreciate your being here today and the fact that you are willing to stay for the full hour because our meeting was truncated by the vote. And thank you to the officials who are with you. All the work that you do is very much appreciated. I'm just going to stay on the same subject that has just been raised. Presently, at members' offices, we often are asked questions about the withholding and the clawback of some Canada Child benefits. I'm sure that other members are asked the same questions. There are groups that ask us about this. What we say is that if we understand correctly, in 2020, the CRA returned to normal, and there were suspensions of this made. But the information is not being disseminated clearly. Perhaps there's phishing going on. Perhaps people are afraid to consult the agency online. So I'd ask you to shed some light on this. And also, when you have these families that are not very well off, where can they call at the agency to be able to get some help? Now, at the CRA, we are there to support people, to support businesses, and we are client-oriented, truly client-oriented. Step by step, we encourage people to call the CRA to make agreements. And it's really on a case-by-case basis that we work. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Another subject now. There are small and medium-sized businesses in our riding that are accountant technicians that do taxes. But we know that they are affected by the lack of staffing at times, so like everywhere. But this is a peak season. The tax filing season is a very heavy season for them, and sometimes they can't meet the demand. Is it possible to extend the tax filing season, to extend it by a month, say, the deadline for sending in your taxes? Could you take that into consideration, and given the fact that it's so hard to hire people to do the work? We have spoken about that. But exceptionally, during the pandemic, we did extend the tax filing season until the end of September. But thereafter, it's important for people to come back to the normal dates, the regular dates. All the work that was done after the fact by the CRA, we want people to be able to adapt as well, whether it's the guaranteed income supplement or the Canada Child Benefit. It's July 1 for the new level. So because of these constraints, we have to respect the same parameters. However, when you bring up this type of information, I have to say that we do know that, and we are aware of the problem, the hiring problem, and major accounting firms currently are doing work with businesses. And we know that for the private individual, they have a difficulty getting tax preparers or accountants. They can come into a discussion with the CRA and to try to find a solution, because we are very aware of this particular concern. Thank you. Once again, I thank you for your answer. Another subject, fraud. Fraud for the CERB. There was a program that was set up very quickly at the beginning of the pandemic, and that led to a great demand on the part of persons, some of which were fraudulent. You followed up with that, and I've asked you about that in the past, that you were going to investigate to see. So what is the process for these fraudulent CERB cases? What's been done? Can you give me some numbers? I'll give the floor to my officials, but before doing that, I will say that what was said during the pandemic is that there were people that were the victims of identity theft, and that is part of the work that we have to do, so that these persons will not have to pay back. They will not be penalized. It's very clear to me, and it's clear to the government. But administratively speaking, I'm going to give the floor to my colleague. Thank you very much, Chair. In fact, yes, indeed, there was a great deal of many Canadians were the victims of identity theft. But we in the CRA want to be able to validate these cases of fraud to see what exactly needs to be done. We want to be able to set the clock back to zero to correct the situation, because we don't want these people who were victims of identity theft to have to pay back a debt that was not theirs. And there is an internal process. When someone calls, we put them directly in contact with an agent at the CRA who specializes in that, and they will be given information about that. Now, with respect to the number of cases, we made a report to the committee, I believe, previously, about 26,000 cases of this particular nature occurred. But when you compare that to the 9 million applications that were made, it was 26,000 cases. Thank you.
To the NDP, MP Blakey for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Ministre, et vos officiels.
Thank you, Madam Minister, and thank you to your officials for being here today. I want to come back to the issue of the Canada Child Benefit and the overpayments that the CRA is clawing back, is recovering. Is it because of a higher salary that perhaps was created by the CERB? How much recovery of CERB is actually being done? Because you know, in certain families that increase the family income. I want to reassure my colleague, Mr. Chair, the payments that were made under the Canada Child Benefit at the beginning and the supplement to it at the beginning of the pandemic were used only to recover the debt. They are not. That is not being used to recover the CERB. It's a totally different process. Microphone, please. Now, with respect to the guaranteed income supplement for people who were clawed back on that, is it because they received that money? I'm wondering if something similar is happening here with this benefit because that contributed to a higher income for these people. With respect to the total salary that included the CERB, and therefore they were not entitled to the same level of the Canada Child Benefit as was the case beforehand. So now I want to know if it's going to be, is it actually the fact that the CERB is the cause of the overpayment and the clawback or recovery that is being effected now? With respect to the recovery of the Canada Child Benefit debt, that covers only the pandemic period. But the work began in the fall. And as I have mentioned, these surpluses with respect to the CERB, it's not being used, the CCB is not being used to calculate the excess of the CERB. But maybe my official has something to say.
In response to the question, can the Canada Emergency Recovery Benefit or COVID benefits have an impact on the ultimate amount that a recipient would receive for the Canada Child Benefit? The answer is yes, it could have an impact. It's calculated based on adjusted family net income and then other factors such as the number of children. So if there is a change in the individual's family income earned, it could absolutely have an impact on the amount of the Canada Child Benefit that somebody would be a recipient of.
Payments could very well have been caused because people received a pandemic benefit. And that reduced the amount that they'd be entitled to under the CCB. Now that's what's being recovered. But we know from the GIS, for instance, that seniors weren't warned when they signed up for the pandemic benefit program that could have an impact on their GIS eligibility in subsequent years. Families are in a similar situation. And the debt recovery that's happening now is effectively what happened to seniors that we did manage finally to get fixed a while ago is now happening to families as they realize that their eligibility for pandemic support programs in a time of great need is now, or did at some time, affect the level of support that they would receive under other programs, but they weren't made aware at the time what those future impacts would be. So it was not possible for them to budget for what they didn't know about. And I'm concerned about the impact that this is having on families that are now surprised at the impact that it had on other benefits that they depend on in order to be able to put food on the table. And of course, this is not a good time for families to be surprised by shortfalls in their budget. I do want to ask, I know in the budget, it talked a little bit about supplementary resources for ESDC, and I know that's not your department, but it is for integrity checks on pandemic benefit programs. There's been hundreds of $1 million allocated in the past for integrity checks and follow-up on pandemic programs. I think with the 50-some-odd million that's dedicated in this budget, we're in the neighborhood of $300 to $350 million now in supplementary funding that government has requested of Parliament for debt recovery. And there's an estimated debt amount for CERB programs of about $3 billion. I understand that that's not necessarily a final number, and that number is a running tally of the department as it resolves files. But I'm wondering how it is that the agency has not yet conducted a bird's eye view analysis of all of those CERB files to be able to know kind of the salary profile. Also, when we talk about cases of fraud, I mean, has the CRA looked through all of the cases to flag which ones they think are cases of fraud? If so, why not along the way would you have collected data to be able to know, people in, low-income folks make up this much amount of the extant debt versus high-income earners versus people where we think identity fraud was committed? Can you provide us with a breakdown of the debt you think you're owed and who owes it? Not individuals. We're not looking for names, but we're looking for some demographic
MP
profile.
Blakey, so we're well over the time. If anybody has a short, I'm talking 10-second answer, that's great. Or if you could get the information to the MP, that would be, and to the committee, that would be great.
What I'd like to tell my colleague is this. During the pandemic, we devoted all our energy at the CRA to responding to the crisis and to making programs that would help Canadians. But the process isn't finished yet. We are still looking at some 2 years for audits and for checking. To be able to give you figures right now, it wouldn't perhaps be the right thing to do, to my mind, given the fact that we are continuing our undertaking to do integrity checks and these audits, and we don't want to have false information or bad information out there.
Minister and officials, we are moving into our second round of questions, so timing is a little bit different. We're starting with the Conservatives for 5 minutes. MP Helen, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, thank you for being here today. Today, during this holy month of Ramadan, I'm thinking about the great work that's done by our Muslim brothers and sisters, especially ones that are in Muslim-led charities, who are some of the first groups of people that respond to any tragedies that happen or the ones that step up for our most vulnerable. So, given that, Minister, why do Muslim-led charities feel like they're being discriminated against by you and your department?
Well, listen, I'd like to say to my colleague that the work that is done by the CRA with Muslim organizations, well, there is a systematic, on my part, looking at it, and there was a report that was prepared by the Ombudsman. It was tabled Monday this week, and also there's a committee at the CRA that deals with charities. And this year we have 2 persons who represent the Muslim organizations. It was suggested to us to bring to the table representatives of the organizations, of the charities, and we are working hard to continue this work.
But I just wanted a yes or no answer on this one. Do you recognize that there's a systemic problem within your department that makes Muslim-led charities feel like they're being discriminated against? Yes or no? Just yes or no.
What I can say is that as far as the CRA is concerned, work has to be carried on. With respect to systemic racism, of course, we can always do better. But no matter what the color, no matter what, I, for one,
amount of time. Just some of the grievances that we've been hearing from Muslim-led charities up until recently is that they feel like there's never-ending audit processes. Some Muslim-led charities indicated that they felt they were being treated more severely and differently at certain points in the audit process. Auditors would not let interviewees record interviews, and in some cases it feels like they are trying to find something, no matter how small, to pin on this charity. Minister, it seems like within your department that if there are charities outside of the Muslim-led ones as well that feel discriminated against because they may have a different ideology than the Liberal government. This is a complaint that we've heard from a lot of religious groups that may have different ideology. And I just wanted to highlight that because this is causing a lot of pain. There's a lot of youth-led initiatives or community building initiatives that are being done by these charities that once their charitable status is revoked because maybe their ideology doesn't meet with your government's, that all of that great work goes away. And in regards to the ombudsperson that you noted, even in his report, he says even when we had received consent from a charity to access their taxpayer information, the CRA redacted information that detailed why this charity was screened for audit and how it planned to carry out the audit. Without access to specific charity risk assessments, our office was unable to see examples of how these considerations would have applied to a real file or examples of information that would have informed the selection of an audit in particular. As a result, we have not been able to sufficiently address two of the areas. So, there's all these what we call gatekeepers, and they're gatekeeping so that information cannot get out. I'm not saying that this is a directive that you gave, but it would lead one to believe that there is it's being blocked, that this work cannot be done to reveal why there's discrimination against our Muslim-led charities. I'd also like to highlight that under your government, in 2021, there was a report by Polera that there's rampant racism inside of IRCC that's been unaddressed. It's not only just to the applicants that are trying to come to this country, especially ones fleeing from harm in the refugees, but also against employees, and it's being unaddressed. I just wanted to know what steps have you taken since then to address this issue for our Muslim-led charities?
We're actually at the end of time, so if you want to make a short, brief comment, that's fine. But we've got to move on if we're going to get through this round to the Liberals. Yeah.
I just say this to my colleague. We look very, very favorably on applicants, and at the next step is a very logical one. Since the Ombudsman has put out his report. But we will continue to fight against systemic racism within organizations.
And MP Chattel, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup,
Thank you very much, Minister, and welcome to the Finance Committee. I'm very, very happy to see you so well accompanied by your officials. In 2000, I began my career at the CRA and in the area of advance decisions. Since we have the officials here, at the peak of the pandemic, I was at the OECD, and I saw everything that was happening with respect to tax administration that was being done to help insofar as possible the OECD countries. There were people who had enormous needs they needed help. They were losing their jobs. They could not go to work anymore. I just want to say that the CRA was a leader in those measures. All the practices that you put in place were adopted by other countries. So I say congratulations, because that is an achievement. Sometimes when you go abroad, you are able to look and see that the CRA is really an entity that is very much looked up to. So bravo. My question, in your introductory remarks, you mentioned two items which for me are very important. I'm happy to see that additional resources have been set aside. I'd like you to give more detail, though. The first is on the budget that was earmarked to deal with tax avoidance and tax evasion. I'd like to hear you on that. And secondly, the budget that was earmarked for international tax arrangements. This is something that is of great interest to me. It is of concern to me as well, and I want to hear you on that. Well, thank you for your question. Indeed, this is a concern for everyone, for all the population, but it is a concern for the government. We want to see everybody pay their fair share. Each person should. Each entity should. And when you have the monies that have been invested to put in place to counter tax avoidance and tax evasion since we've formed government, and country by country as well. I will leave it to my officials to give you a more specific answer on what is happening right now. Thank you for the question. Yes, there are several different initiatives that are being proposed for funding in the budget. I can give you a few examples. Internationally speaking, all the initiatives that have been led by the OECD for the two pillars solution, and Canada plays an important leadership role in that area. Also, in terms of supporting the eventual implementation of this very significant and important initiative, which will change the approach that is undertaken internationally, and that will allow us to put in place the solutions based on the two pillars. There are new regulations that are going to be adopted internationally with respect to another source of data that will be made available to the CRA, and it's very important. The government has announced that it will implement these new rules. Some initiatives I have mentioned, but there are, of course, others in terms of our program. We have a program, for example, that deals with criminal inquiries. It was noted in the 2022 budget to increase our capacity therein. And these are just a few examples of the initiatives that appear in the budget. Thank you very much indeed.
Members, I will have to hold strictly to the time so we can get through this round, and we're going to the block now. MP Saint-Marie for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. On the same subject, in April 2021, 2 years ago, Radio-Canada put out an article on the Panama Papers, and I thought that there were unacceptable results from that. So with that leak, Germany was able to get 225 million, Canada 21 million, but Revenue Quebec, for example, was in a different position. Madam Minister, can you tell me what has been the result of the Panama Papers? No charges have been laid yet, though, and will there be charges laid in the future, do you think? Thank you for the question. Indeed, we are currently working on a number of audits, many audits that are related to Panama, Paradise, and Pandora. And we have on our website the statistics that are regularly updated. The most recent statistic that I can share of December 2022 based that would deal with the Panama Papers League. We have finished some 280 audits, and we have recovered $76 million. We have 140 further audits that are underway. In terms of criminal inquiries, we have 5 inquiries that have been launched. 2 are currently underway. 3 have been closed, but there have been no charges laid. For Paradise, you were mentioning that. With respect to Paradise, but let me clarify this. For Panama, 900 Canadian taxpayers, individuals and businesses, and trusts were identified. But it's important to note that the simple fact of your name appearing on a list does not necessarily mean that that entity has committed some sort of tax avoidance or other. For Paradise Papers, we have finished our inquiry of all the programs. 30 investigations have been done, 28 million recovered, 25 other inquiries are underway. With respect to Pandora, the most recent leak, 400 Canadian taxpayers have been identified, and we are presently assessing the risk with respect to the files. Thank you, but we've carried out some.
And now,
thank you.
MP Samari, and to MP Blakey now for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. So, in the spring of 2020, there were kids in Manitoba graduating out of foster care. And in a context where there was no jobs available because everything was shut down, they went to the provincial government to apply for social assistance. They were told by the provincial government they had to apply for CERB before they could be eligible for social assistance. The government in Manitoba knew that it was a no-fail process and that the kids would not be denied. So they ended up getting their income from CERB. They weren't eligible, but they applied not only in good faith, but at the behest of a government authority. These are some of the folks who owe CERB debt. I'm concerned that the agency isn't looking at the profiles of the people who owe money and then prioritizing within that subset. I'm concerned for 2 reasons. I think in the case of these kids who graduated out of foster care, there's a moral argument for why they should be spared that kind of recovery action. But I'm also concerned from the point of view of efficiency of resources. If the government's spending about $350 million to recuperate $3 billion, we're already spending about 10% of the total debt to get it back. And then the question is, how much of it do we actually think we'll get back? We won't get a lot back from low-income folks who are struggling in a context of inflation. So why is it that the agency hasn't tried to prioritize debt cases by likelihood of recovering funds? And what would it take to operationalize a principle that if somebody is below the low-income cutoff, the department will pursue their debt last and go first after cases where there were identity theft or double claims or the things that are very obviously somebody acting in bad faith, then the category of people who may have applied in good faith and have the income to pay back, and only lastly go after the people that applied in good faith and clearly are not going to be able to pay that debt back. Why isn't there prioritization? What would it take to do it?
Mr. Chair, as I mentioned at the outset, I'd like to say to my colleague that there is work that is being done and there is a plan in place for recovering CERB. It's on a case-by-case basis, and we do encourage people to call the CRA. But at the outset, as I said, we want to be able at the agency to be able to do a post-mortem of what was done well and what was not, to establish best practices. That, was the largest event in the world in recent times. And so we have to be able to assess it that way. We had to work with the provinces. And I do agree. Were there people that there were people who abused the system? I'm convinced that there were. And I think that also there were people who were abused by the system. So we want to be able to do better in the future. Thank you, Minister.
Lakey, and just Minister, so you're aware, and members, so just with a little flexibility on the time. We're going to go now to the Conservatives and then to the Liberals just to finish off the full round. And I've got MP Morantz for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister, my question to you is around the importance of the independence of officers of Parliament. For example, yesterday we learned that the Ethics Commissioner is actually the sister-in-law of Minister LeBlanc, who is the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. It's hard to, I have trouble believing I'm even saying that, but because it seems so absurd. But last fall, when the Auditor General's report was tabled, I was in the House when you were asked a question, and you said something to the effect that you felt that the Auditor General's findings were skewed because they had been pressured by the Conservatives. Given the importance of the independence of an office like the Auditor General, I'm wondering if you could just advise the committee if you still feel that way or if you'd like to retract that statement.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Auditor General and all her team for the very important work they do. As I've already said, I have the greatest respect in the world for the role and what is done by the Auditor General for the functions that she carries out. I don't want any perception of lack of respect or lack of ethics in the work that is done by the Auditor General. I had a meeting with the Auditor General before her report was tabled, and I had this discussion. What I said remains.
Minister, I just want to make sure that we have a direct response from you on this. You said in the House that you thought that the Conservatives had pressured her with the findings that she had provided in that report that were not flattering to your government at all. $4.5 billion in fraudulent payments, close to $30 billion in questionable payments. Just yes or no, do you think that Conservatives pressured the Auditor General to skew the results of her report? Yes or no? Yes or no?
Listen, the work done by the Auditor General and her team is enormous. But it's a little early. We have just undertaken the various audits. We have to work with the various agencies, and we still have 2 years' worth of work ahead of us. And what I said stands.
Go on to my next question. It's unfortunate that we couldn't get a direct response on that one, but I'll try another area of discussion. Parliamentary Budget Office has reported that since 2015, the Public Service of Canada overall departments has increased by 49,000 people, and that 9,900 of those people were hired by CRA since 2015. I'm just wondering if you think, given the increase in the size of the departmental staff, whether service levels are considerably higher since 2015, are higher today than they were in 2015.
Monsieur le Président, comme
Chair, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, I said that the agency put in place 13 programs since the pandemic. The staff at the CRA have done exceptional work to protect Canadians, individuals, and businesses. and employers and employees. The CRA is doing outstanding work. I can't repeat it often enough. They've been our guardian angels during the pandemic.
Appreciate your view that the department is doing good work, and I know there is good work being done in the department. But the reason I'm asking you this question really has to do with the recent ombudsman's report that says that the number of complaints that their office has received about CRA and your department has doubled from 2021 to 2022, notwithstanding that you're asking for $15 billion more in funding and you've had at least 9,900 more staff. Why are complaints doubling? Why are we spending more to get poor service?
Sir, so that, yeah, Minister, please.
Probably because the CRA is continuing its work. We are not really out of the pandemic, but nonetheless, there are programs that have ended, and that's why there are more complaints to the CRA.
Going to our last questioner, I've got MP Baker for the Liberals, please.
Bonjour, Madame la Ministre.
Good afternoon, Madam Minister. It's a pleasure to see you, as well as all of the officials that are here with you. I'd like to begin by thanking you personally, but also all your team for the very important work that you have done during the pandemic. It's easy to forget the amount of work, the volume of work that was done in a very short period of time. There were so many people who needed help, and as you said earlier, Minister, you had to create programs, develop them, put them in place, fund them, help these people financially who were in a very, very vulnerable situation. So once again, I thank you and your team who have done all that. It's really very, very impressive. Madam Minister, there was a question earlier that I'd like to go back to with respect to the audits. I think that my constituents in Etobicoke Centre and those who are listening to this meeting would like to hear what is the work that is done, what is the process that is done in auditing something. Here, I'm talking about audits that deal with financial support that was offered during the pandemic. Can you explain a little what exactly was done? Can you give some examples? How do you audit this? Thank you for your question. And since it's very technical, I'm going to give the floor to my officials. They will answer. I can answer, perhaps, with respect to businesses. We have an audit program that is set up currently. The first step is to make a risk assessment. We have several sources of data for that and information that we have. We also have tools to assess the risk in terms of business intelligence that allows us to identify the risk from these sources of information. And beyond that, we are able then to build our plans. We are going to be having a plan with respect to businesses. The first phase will be in August, as of August 2020, and it will deal with types of questions that will be asked, and the answers to those questions will inform the second stage of that particular program. We've just finished. We're finishing the first year. We will soon be undertaking the second year, and it is a process that, as I have said, is based on risk assessment, the evaluation of risk, and it is a process that will allow us to learn and to adjust as we go along. We are ready to publicly report the results of our efforts with respect to employers. Yes, but could you tell me this in so many words? How many businesses and how many individuals that you will have to audit? I'm talking specifically about these financial cases related to the pandemic. I can answer for businesses. My colleague can answer for individuals. 4,400 presently, underway or finished. That gives you the proportion. We have others, though, that we will be launching during the second phase. But we ultimately will have about 7,000 audits with respect to the CERB and the wage supplement, the emergency wage supplement. We have people who have made applications and who have been supported by a third party. So we will have about some 5,000 files that will have to be audited. It gives you an idea of the breadth of what we are dealing with. Some 460,000 employers have received the SSUC.
Merci, Ministre Laboutier.
Thank you, Minister and team.
Your team that is here for your testimony, for coming before our committee for this study. We really appreciate it, and thanks for your flexibility today. So, members, at this time, we're going to suspend as we bring in our second panel. Thank you. Everybody, we're resuming the meeting, and we've got a lot of witnesses with us here for the second panel. And with us, we've got witnesses, many here. You should have gotten your notice of meeting from the Department of Finance, and also from Financial Transactions and Reports Analysis Center of Canada, as well as the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. And I understand that Mr. Christopher Villeux, and I apologize if I mispronounced that, will be making an opening statement for up to 5 minutes. Monsieur Villeux.
Merci.
Thank you.
Chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to present the 2023-2024 main estimates on behalf of the Department of Finance. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin peoples. Joining me today are other departmental officials to assist in providing a more in-depth perspective on the rationale and policies supporting the numbers within these main estimates. As you know, the Department of Finance supports the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, as well as the Minister of Tourism and Associate Minister of Finance, by developing policies and providing advice to the government with the goal of creating a healthy and resilient economy for all Canadians. The 2023-2024 main estimates reflect departmental budgetary spending of $128.9 billion. This is composed of $128.5 million in voted budgetary expenditures and $128.8 billion in statutory budgetary expenditures. The 2023 main estimates reflect a net decrease of $9.4 million in voted budgetary expenditures from the 22-23 main estimates, stemming primarily from sunsetting funding related to the COVID-19 Economic Support and Recovery Advertising Initiative. Statutory expenditures are not included in the appropriation bill, as they've already been approved by Parliament through enabling legislation. However, they are included in the estimates for information. The statutory budgetary expenditures in these main estimates reflect a net increase of $18.3 billion in statutory budgetary expenditures, which is mainly due to an increase in interest on unmatured debt and legislated increase in major transfers to other levels of government. Mr. Chair, this concludes my overview of these main estimates for the Department of Finance. My colleagues and I would now be pleased to answer any questions the committee members may have.
Merci, Monsieur Villeux.
Thank you, Mr. Villeux.
The officials that are with us here today. And just before we go to members' questions, so I did kind of scan the room and speak to a number of the members about how much time we have. We'll look to conclude just after, before 1:55 members, because some of us have to get out to another meeting. And just we want to get to a couple of questions on this report just at the conclusion of this second panel. So now we're going to go right to questions from members in this first round. We've got the Conservatives for 6 minutes. MP Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses, especially to appear in person. I think it makes it a lot easier. We did have a meeting last week that was a bit challenging, and so I really do appreciate it. The one person that I guess I'm missing is the Minister of Finance, and in turn, instead of making that a negative, I'll turn that into a positive, and I would once again thank the Minister for National Revenue of coming last hour. We greatly appreciate that. I want to start in the current budget, then I'll work my way back. In the current budget, it's forecasting about $15 billion in savings, $7 billion of that coming from an across-the-board 3% cut. Now, I'm a little skeptical that this will actually happen because in this last fall economic statement, it said that there would be $3 billion in savings, department savings. In reality, there were not $3 billion in savings. However, I would say that it was a little bit, what's the proper word here? I don't want to go too hard, but perhaps not a little bit disingenuous, because underneath that column, the Department of Finance put lapsed COVID savings to fill in that gap of that $3 billion in savings. I don't think that that's altogether fair, but I would like your comment on that.
I'll task that question, I think, to Evelyn Dancing, the ADM Fiscal Policy.
Well, I'm not quite sure the question that's kind of left with me, there's a comment about the fall economic statement. And I mean, we reported $3.8 billion of savings against a $3 billion commitment. The measure in the budget, we're quite confident, will result in the savings that are announced. There is a process that will be led by the Treasury Board Secretariat now that the budget has been tabled. If there's something kind of more specific, I'd be happy to try to address it.
So specifically, you allocated, when I think of savings across a department, what I think of is perhaps reductions in expenses, reductions in overhead, reductions in other type of costs. I don't think of it being lapsed savings from COVID benefits not paid out. But in your department, but that's what the budget seemed to say. Am I correct in that?
Well, in respect of the forward-looking measures in the budget, the 3% reduction that you speak of, this is very much a forward-looking exercise with the intent to adjust the budgets of the departments and other entities that are within scope.
Sorry, no, maybe we're confused here. But I'm looking backwards, and so there was supposed to be $3 billion in savings from departments, which there weren't. Which the department, and we discussed this with officials, and they confirmed that this was in fact lapsed. In other words, dollars not spent on COVID benefits that was sort of put into that line item. Is that a fair or accurate way? And could you see why I might be skeptical about the department's ability to deliver on 3% across the board tax cuts when they've already failed to deliver last year on the supposed cuts?
I guess all I can offer on that type of question is there are two different savings measures announced in Budget 23. One of them is the 3% reduction to professional services, et cetera, which are forward-looking exercises. There's a second measure, which is a realigning of previously announced spending plans. The commitment that the fall economic statement delivered on was similarly of that latter category, a review of previously announced spending plans in order to identify amounts that were unallocated, unnecessary, or items where there just wasn't take-up required.
Thank you very much.
They're just two different types of exercises.
No, thank you very much for that. When we go to the forward-looking cuts, there was very scant on details. Could you provide us, could you flesh that out? Will there be reductions in the public service? Will there be reductions in the footprint? Where will these cost savings come from?
So the specific details I'm not going to be able to elaborate on today because those kind of decisions will be made in the coming months by deputy ministers and ministers who know their businesses best. I would just point out that particularly with respect to this refocusing government spending is the name of the measure, that you speak of with the 3% in the professional services. That is a measure that begins to take effect in terms of savings in 24-25, and it gradually ramps up over 3 years. So to underline that there's time for the organizations to plan and probably flexibility with respect to implications that might be implied for jobs.
I, as well as academia, including a professor at the University of Ottawa, have some skepticism that those cuts will ever occur. And in fact, many academics as well as other individuals have stated that they don't believe that you'll deliver on those cuts quite clearly. And even though our debt to GDP ratio is already increasing, that it could actually continue to increase if you fail to deliver on those cuts. If in fact you're unable to deliver on the savings that you're promising, that will almost certainly impact our debt to GDP ratio and put Canada in a worse financial position. Is that not correct?
Well, I mean, I would say is that the ADM of fiscal policy, certainly one of my top priorities coming out of the budget, is to see through the savings exercise and the fiscal actions that the government has just announced. I believe there's a credible process. It'll be led by the Treasury Board Secretariat. But, I agree with your point that this is fiscally material amount of savings that's been booked, and it must be delivered upon. The scale is it's certainly significant to our calculations and our planning. I think that debt to GDP is probably a line of conversation you don't want to use your time up on, but happy if you wanted to return on that.
Lawrence, and now to the Liberals, MP Baker, please, for 6 minutes.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you to everyone for being here today and for your work every day on behalf of Canadians and and the recent work you've been doing in a number of different areas, including on the most recent budget. So thank you for that. I'd like to start by saying, just as a continuation of the discussion that was just had about the 3%, that I had the opportunity as a member of the Ontario Legislature to sit on the Treasury Board at the Government of Ontario, where we went through an exercise of trying to refocus spending. We may have called it something slightly different, but it sounds very similar to what's in this budget and these estimates. And prior to that, I used to work for a company called Boston Consulting Group and work with companies who were trying to do something similar in the private sector. And so I know how challenging that can be. But notwithstanding those challenges and notwithstanding the sum of money that you've spoken to that's involved and how important it is to our fiscal plan, I have great confidence in your ability to deliver on that and looking forward to seeing you deliver against that. So I wanted to just express that. I wanted to ask about the net increase in, I think I heard you say, I think I heard in the opening remarks a mention to the fact that the net increase in the statutory budgetary expenditures is mainly due to legislated increases in major transfers to other levels of government. In other words, when we say legislated increases, we mean increases that have been passed by members of the House of Commons, by MPs. So could you provide us with a list of these transfers and the increases to each of them?
I'll hand that off to Alison McDermott.
Sure. So I won't go through all of them, but I think you should have, like, I'm assuming that you have some information in front of you about what are the major changes. But I'll go through some of the major transfers to other levels of government that are probably most relevant to the increase, which is what you asked about. So there's a very large increase in the Canada Health transfer, which historical 9.3% growth from 45 to 49.4 billion from last year's 2022 figures to 2023 figures. There is an increase in a similarly large increase in the equalization transfers from 21.9 billion to 24.0 billion. There's also a 3% increase in the Canada Social transfer from 15.9 billion to 16.4. And in the territorial financing line, there's an increase from 4.5 billion to 4.8. So I think I'll stop there. There's a lot of smaller changes, but those are some of the very significant ones.
Health, social transfer, equalization, those are some of the largest transfers. And I'm not going to ask you to respond to this, but I think for the context of the folks at home who are watching, so transfers to provinces for health are designed to improve our healthcare system. Equalization can obviously be used by provinces to support whatever programs they deem necessary for their citizens. The social transfer, I think it goes without saying that's there to help those folks across the country who need support. So anyway, I think it's important to highlight that for folks as to where where you put your money speaks to your priorities, I think, as a government, and that your answer helps us highlight what those priorities are. I believe, how much time do I have left, Chair? About
a little over 2 minutes.
A little over 2 minutes. Yeah. Could I ask about, one of the things that's in the news a lot, I think a lot of folks at home are concerned about, frankly, is interest rates. It's impacting a lot of folks' ability to it's impacting their borrowing costs, it's impacting their mortgage payments, their ability to buy a house or inability to buy a house. But it's also having an impact on the government's finances and on how much it costs us to service our debt. So could you just talk about what the impact has been of interest rates on our debt servicing costs, what it costs on our debt servicing costs, and what are your expectations in terms of interest rates going forward and how that will impact our debt servicing costs?
Yeah, I think I'll hand that one over to Evelyn for that one, but I think we could supplement that with one of our other witnesses that are here supporting us.
Thanks.
Let's go ahead, Evelyn.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll start the response with respect to your question on debt service charges. And so, our most recent information is in the budget we tabled just a couple of days ago, where we highlight that the rising interest rate environment, as well as higher borrowing requirements, it does result in higher debt service charges. Public debt charges have risen compared to our fall economic statement. This being said, they remain as a percentage of GDP around 1.5%, which is still low by historical standards. And so kind of from our perspective, this is still a debt service that is sustainable, affordable, and within that lower bound from a historical perspective.
Yes, so thank you for your question on interest rates per se. So as you alluded to, yes, interest rates are higher than they have been in a while. But this is acting to slow the economy now. So inflation is expected to slow as well throughout the year. Given that, the expectations are that rates will also start to go down next year and then return to what we call the neutral rate of interest rates. So it's between 2 and 3%. In fact, private sector expect that interest rates will go back to 2.4% in 2027.
Now to the block, and MP Saint-Marie, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. Deputy Minister, Directors, all, thank you very much for being here. We've heard you. I know you've got a lot of work before you. Your time is precious, but thank you for being here. So numerous. We had a very interesting budget this week. I have a lot of questions about the $80 billion for the reply to the Inflation Reduction Act. There are a lot of details in Chapter 3 of the budget, but I want to know from you if it would be possible to give us your forecasts as precisely as possible on a province-by-province basis. For example, the percentage of carbon would go to what province? Modular nuclear reactors, what province? How many electric power plants in what province? So can you do that? Can you give us the forecast for this $80 billion in benefits? Thank you for your question. I'll take it with me. And of course, we can give you information, but as to whether or not we can give it at all levels, sectorally, provincially, territorially, we'll have to look at it more closely, but we'll definitely give you all the information we can. Thank you, Deputy Minister. That was my principal ask. So I impatiently await your answer, and thank you for your cooperation. I have another question, though. It is a media brief that appeared at the end of January that talked about authorities. According to what was said for 2021-2022, the article said that it was some $38 billion. And when you look at lapsed funding, it could be even $41 billion. That's a lot of money. Do you have estimates for 22, 23? And are you able, even for the budget that was just brought down, are you able to anticipate what lapse funding will be? Thank you. I'll give this to Aidan as well. The details concerning this matter, that is to say, it really is a responsibility for Treasury Board, but we do have a certain access to that data to make our forecasting. Yes, but you don't have details. Okay. When Paul Martin was the Honourable Minister of Finance, when the Bloc Québécois followed his strategy. We knew what it was. For each year, there was a forecast. So using the rule of three, we were able to see what it would be in the future. But now in current budgets, it seems to be all about decreasing markets. So with respect to lapsed funding, there is an artificial inflation of amounts, particularly given that pandemic. So some $40.5 billion, and for the last year available, it was $41 billion. And here I'm referring to lapse funding. So can you make a statement about my comments on this matter? Aidan will handle it again. I can just say simply that the forecasts in our budgets are our best possible forecasts on the data we have now. Okay, at least I tried. In the French version of the budget on page 30, there's a table that I find is extraordinary. Despite the present deficit, Table 29 projects the long-term debt at the federal level, and we can see that it's almost zero. It's quite different from what was calculated by the PBO in his report on financial viability. Why are your prognostics, the debt, GDP, why you are so optimistic? Why are you so optimistic? It's even more optimistic than the PBOs, certainly, in the G7. Yes, well, the long-term projections are presented in the budget, and they show that the federal government's debt will more or less be eliminated by 2055, 2056. The PBO also indicates that the debt will be eliminated in the same period of time. Well, what about the provinces? What did you say? No. Do you have a comment on the provinces? I think it's not the same situation. There, it's not forecasts, it's scenarios based on reasonable economic information. And there may be an impact of a future recession or something. So what that shows is that given the federal debt to GDP ratio, it affects the deficit, and it is also illustrated elsewhere where there are hypotheses with respect to the debt and the economy and how it can be expressed. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. St. Marie.
Blakey and the NDP for 6 minutes, please.
I'm back to the question of the 3% savings across departments. I mean, we know that, the Minister for National Revenue was here earlier, and she concluded her opening remarks praising the staff at the CRA for the good work they do, and no doubt there are folks across government who have done a lot of hard work over the last number of years. Many of them have been 2 years now without a contract, and that has, those 2 years have been incredible in terms of inflation and cost of living. I think there's some concern that, naming a 3% savings target in advance of concluding those agreements is an attempt to try and put constraints on what's possible at the bargaining table. So I'd like to hear whether, it's the department's intention that 3% savings be represented in the mandate of Treasury Board at the bargaining table, or if the idea is to find those savings outside of the collective bargaining process so that the period of inflation that we've all been going through can be recognized in some appropriate way at the bargaining table in those negotiations.
Over to you, Lynn, as well.
Thank you for that question and for sharing that observation from the minister, because we weren't in the room yet, and so that was an interesting connection to make. So I'm the ADM at Finance responsible kind of for both of these tracks of work. In my mind, certainly, they're quite separate. The president of the Treasury Board has a mandate for collective bargaining that she and her officials are pursuing right now with the bargaining agents, dozens of bargaining agents in good faith. The refocusing of government spending measure, it really is forward-looking and a response to an understanding that the size of government grew quite significantly through the COVID period, and it is an appropriate and fiscally important time to pause and ensure we are being most efficient with resources of taxpayers in light of some very significant and costly priorities that the government is advancing, including healthcare and dental care. So in my mind, these are quite separate.
Thank you very much for that comment. I wanted to ask, with respect to some of the items in the budget, there's a new clean electricity investment tax credit. The Kavalik Hydrolink project is named specifically in the section on that. But I note that there's no funding in the table for the clean electricity tax credit until the 24-25 fiscal year. My understanding is that project is kind of ready to go to the next stage, but that federal funding is required and a federal kind of mandate or endorsement of the project is required in order to help that project get to the next level. Does this mean that there won't be support for the project until 24-25, or are there other envelopes out of which that project could find a basis to keep making steady progress?
Thank you for your question. So with respect to the electricity investment tax credit, the clean electricity investment tax credit, the effective date will be budget 2024. In the next year, we're going to continue to refine the implementation and the draft legislative proposal with respect to this credit. There are still a number of design elements to work on and clarify. Also, I would note with respect to the transition coming into force, that there will be rules such that those projects that have started already as of budget day 2023 would not be eligible. So basically, the next year is a bit of a year whereby for these projects, even if they continue, they're not missing out because they would not be eligible anyway. The fact that it's available in budget 2024, a project that would start in between would still qualify though. And so this is the way that this investment tax credit will be.
So is there an existing envelope out of which a project like the Kavalik Hydrolink hydrofiber link could be funded?
With respect to envelope, there's no specific funding because it's a refundable investment tax credit.
I mean, outside of the tax credit. So what I'm hearing is that the project won't be eligible for the tax credit in any event. Yeah. Are there other envelopes in the meantime out of which the next stage of that project might be funded?
Certainly, and I think it's really worth pointing to another measure in the budget, which relates to the Canada Infrastructure Bank and giving that Crown Corporation an increased focus on clean electricity. So the budget from 2 days ago indicated that the CIB's investment targets for both its clean power priority area as well as its green infrastructure priority area would both be increased from $5 billion to $10 billion. So that will provide additional focus and space for the CIB to be able to support important clean electricity infrastructure projects. And in fact, we know the CIB has been in discussions, I believe, with the proponents of that particular project that you're mentioning.
How quickly do you anticipate the infrastructure bank will be able to operationalize those changes to its mandate?
I think, as usually happens after a budget document that includes new direction, or I shouldn't say direction, but new policy space to the bank, it takes a bit of time to work through what that means for it, and then brings that forward as part of its corporate planning process. And so we would expect to see that come forward over the course of the coming months. its next corporate plan is in fact due to come forward fairly soon. So
Okay, and you would anticipate seeing that in the next corporate plan?
You could just answer that. Yeah.
I'm confident that the bank will be looking at all of the newest new spaces for it that were in the budget, and we'll be looking at that in the context of it.
Thank you, Ms. Haynes and MP Blakey, and just members, witnesses. We won't have time for a full second round. What I'm going to do is break up time equally. We'll have 5 minutes for each of the parties, and we'll start with the Conservatives and have MP Morantz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll be splitting my time with MP Chambers. Just wanted to ask you about, 4 months ago, the fall economic statement was tabled, and one of the good things in it, which, I realize it's, our job to criticize as the official opposition, but one of the good things about it was that in 27-28 it forecast a $4.5 billion surplus, which is, music to the ears of most Conservatives. We like to see surpluses. The budget that was just tabled in that same year shows a $14 billion deficit now, $18.5 billion swing in the 27-28 budgetary outlook. Why?
Thank you very much for the question. I'll hand that one over to Evelyn Dancy.
Sure. So the table that I find kind of most helpful, and you might have already seen that, is page 20 of the English version, our table 1, where we start with the budgetary balance from the fall economic statement and work our way down through the new measures in the budget, but also changes in terms of economic and fiscal developments. And so just to illustrate, there are a couple, there are many reasons that our forecasts change from publication to publication, but a couple significant ones I'd note in terms of kind of the end balance in 27-28. Among others, there are economic conditions, as I've already spoken to, that have resulted in fiscal impacts, including with respect to our public debt charges. That's one element of additional cost compared to the fall economic statement. There are all the measures in the budget, many of which have net fiscal impacts in that final year of our forecast, and that would very notably include the new long-term care health care funding with provinces, as well as the further details about the dental plan.
Thank you. Congratulations on a budget. Those are very hard work. It takes a lot of time and effort. I just want to flip back to the savings. There is a difference between a lapse and a one-time savings and an ongoing run rate reduction. So are we to understand that the commitment now going forward is a commitment to find annual run rate reductions in government spending? Yeah. So is that that's a yes?
Yes, the budget measure includes an announced ongoing savings component.
So follow-up question. Has the government yet identified, up until now, any existing program for savings? Has there been a cut to any ongoing program yet?
This ongoing savings commitment in the budget will be followed through by a Treasury Board Secretariat President-led process. So,
but up until now, there's been no program identified cut by the government, correct? Right? At one point, there was savings to be had, and we found the savings by lapsing spending. We actually never cut a program, but we're to believe now that we will find run rate spending eventually.
This measure includes ongoing savings, and it follows up on the Budget 22 commitment to do so.
My Liberal colleague said you can tell a lot by your priorities about where you're spending. How much is the total interest paid on the debt for 23-24 next year? So 44 billion, right?
Yes.
And how much do we spend on the Canada Health transfer next year? 49? It's like within $3 or $4 billion.
Yep.
We're spending almost as much on debt servicing costs as we are transferring for health care. It would seem to me that the priority of the government is to service the debt because it's grown so much. And part of the reason is because of interest rates, which have been driven up by a number of factors. We can get into some of them now, but we don't have time. But the governor of the Bank of Canada just last week said that deficit spending made interest rates go higher this year. So that is one of the things that, we're looking at. Would you agree with the previous governor of the Bank of Canada?
On that point, maybe I just point out the budgetary balance is improved sharply over the last couple of years following the increase with the pandemic emergency support. So the fact that the budget balance has improved sharply also provide a signal that of declining net stimulus provided by fiscal policy over that period of time. So
thank you.
MP Chambers, and now over to MP Chattel for the Liberals for 5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I think that Mr. Chambers would agree with me that we've also gone through budget seasons, and we also know how much work it is. It's a difficult work that starts months and months before the date of the budget. I know that the work that is done on the budget is excellent, and it's certainly not easy. You have to be fiscally prudent, but there are challenges, and I would say this budget has met its objectives. Can I come back to the GDP? Madame Turcotte, you were speaking about this earlier. It is quite extraordinary that Canada would be the country with the very best debt to GDP ratio of the G7. And the same thing with respect to the deficit to the ratio deficit to GDP. So can you tell me about the advantage that Canada enjoys because of this, because of its solid position in the international community, given its green economy of tomorrow? Two answers, two streams to your question. First of all, the associations linked to the government could then have weaker long-term expectations, which could be an advantage for Canada. And go ahead for the second part. With the weaker GDP, you could have 3A credits, as do have the majority of the principal countries in the world. And there's the interest is weaker, and therefore negative. Well, it seems to me that it's excellent. We do have our ambitions. There is an issue that that is of interest to me. It deals with money laundering, the money laundering of the proceeds of crime. And I know that you have something to say about what exists in Canada. Would you be able to speak to that issue? In the budget, we announced a program. It's obligatory every 5 years on a 5-year basis. And for those who are accountable and who are responsible for the system, there has to be a consultation of the population, but also we consult the system. How can we do things better? How can we do things differently, say, for the coming year or for the next period of time? There is a document that will be put in place containing the minister's recommendations, and that will be presented to parliamentarians. I certainly encourage you to follow the recommendations of GAFI that I follow attentively, as do my colleagues. One of the parts of this budget is of interest to me, especially. It is the transition to a green economy, to allow our businesses and our workers to enjoy extraordinary success in the coming years. There are people in Canada, many of them, who are very interested in this. Can you speak to me about the advantages of a program like that? And can you speak to what is being done by the Americans now? Where does Canada figure into that, the type of key work that we do? Ms. Ng?
At the end of our time, and we are, yes, it goes quick, and we're moving to the block. MP Sainte-Marie for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Clearly, from my perspective, when I look at the figures that were put forward by the PPO, the debt to GDP ratio indicates a fiscal imbalance. It's a very significant problem. But let me move on to something else. I'd like to have this confirmed. During the pandemic, the government spent, we in the Bloc Québécois asked for the government to erase the debt of the EI account that had occurred during the pandemic, but it is the businesses and the workers that pay into that account. It was 25.9 billion for 21-22. And 24 billion now for this year. Am I reading the whole situation right as to what is happening? Yes. You have found that table. But what I would add is that the government has already refunded for the EI program. The 27 billion have been transferred, and it is expected that workers will be able to benefit from the 7-year renewal period. Thank you for your answer. 4 out of 10 people lose their job and have to use the EI fund. So this is not a political issue. I was told that if it was 1 out of 2, I think I'd go elsewhere. So to my mind, really, this account is not, the insurance plan is not achieving its goals. To Mr. Amand, in your office as superintendent at OFSI, you see that there are banks in the east and the west, and then there was the Silicon Valley Bank just recently, and Credit Suisse as well, that have had difficulties. So how does Canada stand in terms of financial institutions?
Excuse me, as CFO for OSFI, I'm not in the best position to comment on this, but what I can say is OSFI's mandate is to ensure that we have a sustainable and effective financial services industry in Canada. We've had significant investments in that area, and the superintendent has taken action recently, as you will have seen, when there is a problem. So I think.
Merci, je prenais une chance.
Thank you. I was taking a chance, but thank you for your answer. So let me turn to the finance department. 2 questions. I will ask them one after the other very quickly. With respect to the health agreement, the CHT, Ms. McDermott, are there conditions that are attached to the transfer? If so, what are they? In fact, for the $2 billion that will be supplied this year, there are no conditions, but to participate in the 5% guarantee, we need the commitment of the provinces that we will be able, that there will be data collection. And you have, but not just data collection, that reporting of that data will be effected to better have citizens understand the state of their system. Okay, thank you. To show that the money is being moved into the health sector. Most of these conditions are linked to the other parts of the agreement, of this arrangement. So the conditions on the CHT are very light and come back to the whole issue of cooperation involving the collection of data. I don't have time for my second question. Thank you, Mr. St. Marie.
To our final questioner, which is NDP MP Blakey, please.
My understanding is that the government's made a choice to allocate $25 billion of its CERB debt to the EI account. And I'm just wondering if you can share with the committee what impact that has either on the way that the government reports its deficit or its cumulative debt. Does it make a difference whether that $25 billion of debt is parked with the EI account or on the general ledger?
Thanks for the question. I'll hand it over to Allison. Okay.
Right, I'll start, and you may supplement. So because the EI account is consolidated in the Government of Canada's finances, and so the $25 billion is the $25 billion, wherever it is, in terms of, if there were interest to somehow make the EI account whole faster than the 7-year break-even rate would call for, what that would mean from the Government of Canada's consolidated viewpoint, which is my viewpoint and my role, is we would have to forego $25 billion of revenue in the coming years. Like, that would be the implication of doing that.
That was actually my next question. So then the significant aspect of allocating that debt to the EI account is to raise $25 billion over 7 years through EI premium rates, so that EI premium payers pay $25 billion more over 7 years than they otherwise would if the debt was on the general ledger.
Exactly.
So mathematically speaking, I'm not going to kind of dispute the math there. The government has directly shouldered from the consolidated revenue account the vast amount of support for individuals, both through, like I said, that transfer back for the EI ERB, as well as all of the individual benefits that were flowing through the CRA were paid for through the consolidated revenue account rather than the EI account. What remains in terms of being shouldered by the insurance system are other measures that involved adjustments to parameters, eligibility parameters. That's Allison's expertise, but I would just say again, it is an insurance program and not unfair that recipients within the insurance program make a contribution over time. So it's the 7-year.
The program was effectively paused for the course of the pandemic. I mean, the program that rolled out was not employment insurance as we've known it in Canada ever, really, because the employment insurance program was inadequate to the task. So it's not that the employment insurance program operated in any real sense of the word during the pandemic. What we had was a replacement program, and ESDC administered part of that program for people that otherwise might have been EI eligible. But that was effectively it. It was an administrative decision about how to roll out a program that really had nothing to do with employment insurance, given that EI wasn't up to the task. And then, we don't have to argue that point. I'm pretty settled in my conviction on that. unless you do feel that, a response is warranted. I have another line of questioning that I want to come to. On page 44 of the budget, it talks about a code of conduct to protect Canadians with existing mortgages. And we know that there's been reports lately that, Canada's major banks have anywhere from 20 to 25% of their book with variable rate mortgages on, and a significant number of those are on fixed payment schemes where folks now, their fixed payment isn't even covering all of the interest, let alone any of the principal. And I'm glad that banks are finding a way to accommodate people and keep them in their home. I am looking for an opinion on whether banks are operating within their proper authority doing that, and if there's a need for public policy response. I take the budget to be indicating that there is some desire to have an official public policy response so that this isn't something that's just being decided by banks on their own. So I'm just kind of wondering what that public policy response might look like, the nature of the guidance that might be given to banks. I'm happy to hear from the Department of Finance on this, or if our witness from OSFI. I appreciate your role within the organization. You may not feel prepared to comment on that, but certainly if you have a point of view that you're willing to share with the committee, that would be welcome.
And this will be our final answer to questions.
I can take this one. Yeah, of course, there's some flexibility that banks have right now in order to help some borrowers to make their payment, right? We know that with the rapid rise in interest rates, some have been more stretched than others. The objective here is really to make it public, encourage banks that have not been as strict, active in order to call their clients or make some accommodation, be there and do it. So by making that straightforward, explicit in the budget, we hope that more flexibility will be given to homeowners.
Merci. And thank you, MP Blakey. And so just on behalf of Finance Committee, we do want to thank the officials for their testimony. For members, hang on a second. I just didn't need, I do need your time. But we want to thank the officials for their testimony and for appearing before this study. So witnesses, you're free to go. Officials, you're free to go at this time. Members, I do need you here for a second. So, yeah, Marty. Yeah. I just need a couple of minutes, if I can, for the members really quick. Yeah, really quickly. So members, listen. So if members do wish to adopt the main estimates today, there are the motions that these are the motions that need to be adopted. So members, the motion is, shall I report votes 1 and 5 under the Department of Finance, less the amounts voted in interim supply to the House? Are members okay with that?
Sorry, maybe someone who's had a little bit more time on this committee would you mind sharing with the history or even from the clerks? Is this what's been done the last couple of years, for example?
I'll defer to the clerk.
The study of main estimates can be done as many meetings as you wish. The committee can adopt the main estimates today or can decide to have other meetings on the main estimates to ask the other witnesses to come. So it's entirely at your discretion.
Okay, just given that we're at the end of the meeting, I don't want to be unreasonable, Chair, but if we could perhaps put it off just so we could discuss, that would be great.
Okay, could do that. Yeah, and we have till, May 31st. Okay, the other members, again, and just before you head out the door, so the governor will be with us. Yeah, the Bank of Canada governor will be with us on the 18th, April 18th. So April 18th. Okay, just so members, just so that you are all aware. So thank you. Yeah, okay, and possibly with the PBO. Oh, with the PBO. Okay.
Sorry, the PBO is only for half an hour.
Yeah, because 90 minutes with the governor, right? That was the motion adopted by the committee. So, all right. Thank you, members. And now we'll adjourn.